Okay, so 84.9% Bitcoin allocation. That's what BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, recommended back in a 2022 report. I don't know about you, but when I first saw that number, it really made me do a double take. I mean, these are the folks known for basically urging caution, telling everyone to diversify, think long term, not exactly Bitcoin cowboys, right?
Yeah, so what's going
Uh,
on here is BlackRock suddenly betting the farm on Bitcoin. To help us unpack this, we've got our expert with us. I'm really curious to hear your take on this.
Well, I think what's really fascinating is that BlackRock's interest in Bitcoin seems to come from like a really deep dive into what makes it so fundamentally different. I mean, they're not just chasing returns here. Their analysis, at least from what I've seen, suggests something way more nuanced is happening. Yeah, see, that's what kind of throws me off. My initial reaction, honestly, was Bitcoin. Isn't that like still the wild west of investments? Everyone's always talking about how insanely volatile it is, high risk, all that. It's really tough to figure out if it belongs in the like buy now category or the steer clear category.
And that's exactly where I think most people get tripped up. They try to look at Bitcoin through that traditional lens of risk on, risk off, but it just doesn't quite fit. It's not as simple as just being more or less risky. BlackRock's findings, and this is key, suggest that Bitcoin's value, it's not driven by the same factors as stocks, bonds, or even, gold for that matter.
Okay, so if it's not playing by those like usual Wall Street rules, then what makes Bitcoin tick? What are the real drivers behind its price movements?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting. BlackRock points to a few key factors, and they might surprise you. They're saying Bitcoin is super sensitive to global monetary stability, or maybe even more importantly, the LACK thereof. So things like geopolitical turmoil, concerns about inflation, even worries about US debt and fiscal health, all of that plays a role.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that what's happening like right now on Capitol Hill with the US debt ceiling could actually have an impact on Bitcoin's price?
That's exactly what BlackRock is suggesting, yeah. And they back it up with some really intriguing evidence. Remember back in early 2020 when COVID first hit, the market, I mean, it totally tanked. And initially Bitcoin dipped too. But then what happened? It rallied. And significantly, almost as if it was, mirroring gold in a way. BlackRock's analysis suggests that this wasn't just about the economic downturn, but it was more about investors looking for safety and alternatives outside of that traditional system.
So it's almost like Bitcoin acts as this kind of what barometer for how much faith people actually have in traditional systems.
Precisely. And BlackRock, they highlight other examples that kind of support this idea too, like take the escalation of the US-Iran tensions, again, back in early 2020, or the uncertainty around the 2020 election. And of course, you can't forget about the whole Russia-Ukraine war. In each of these situations, we saw Bitcoin dip initially, but then as these global anxieties started to rise, what happened? Bitcoin rose right along with them.
So it's like whenever that uncertainty spikes, Bitcoin starts to look like a more attractive option to certain investors, kind of like a financial safe haven for those times when, the traditional systems are feeling a little shaky.
Exactly. BlackRock's analysis really challenges that narrative that Bitcoin is just about speculation or even just pure technology. What they found suggests it's emerging as a potential hedge against more traditional risks, almost like a financial shock absorber for your portfolio in times of, well, global turmoil. Sort of similar to how a lot of investors view gold, and this is a big reason why I think we're starting to see institutions taking notice.
This is all super interesting, but I got to say, that 84.9% figure, it kind of keeps coming back to me. Like, it's hard to just shake off that initial shock. It just seems so, I don't know, counterintuitive to everything we thought we knew about how BlackRock approaches, well, investing in general.
Yeah, no, I totally get where you're coming from. It's kind of like seeing your usually super cautious grandma pull up to a poker game in a bright red sports car. But here's the thing about that 84.9% number. It's not as simple as BlackRock saying, hey, everyone should go all in on Bitcoin right now.
Okay. Yeah, good point. So let's maybe unpack this a little bit. What exactly do they even mean by optimal allocation? How does it actually work in practice?
Right, right. Optimal allocation, it sounds like this super complicated Wall Street jargon, but honestly, it's a pretty basic concept when you really break it down. Imagine you're putting together one of those giant puzzles, right? But in this case, the puzzle is your investment portfolio. So each piece that represents a different asset class. You've got your stocks, your bonds, your real estate, And yeah, even things like Bitcoin can fit in there. So optimal allocation, it's kind of like finding that perfect arrangement of all those different pieces to make sure you're creating the most complete picture possible. It's all about balancing like your potential returns with how much risk you're personally comfortable with.
Gotcha. So BlackRock, they ran all their fancy calculations, and they concluded that, at least back in 2022, Bitcoin deserved this, like, massive chunk of that puzzle.
That's one way to put it. But it's important to remember this was all based on a very specific snapshot of what the market conditions were at that time, plus all their own modeling and assumptions.
Yeah.
We don't know for sure if they'd make the same call today, especially with how much the financial landscape has, well, completely shifted even just in the last couple of years.
Yeah, it's like they took this, like, single snapshot of the market back then, and things might look totally different now.
Exactly. The markets are constantly evolving, right? And any smart investor, even a giant like BlackRock, knows that you have to adapt to those changing dynamics if you want to stay ahead of the game. Plus, and this is crucial, even within that whole optimal allocation framework, BlackRock was very clear about acknowledging Bitcoin's, shall we say, unique volatility. They weren't trying to downplay the risks or pretend it was like some guaranteed path to getting rich quick.
So it wasn't like a total go-all-in endorsement. It was more like BlackRock saying, hey, there's definitely potential here, but don't forget, this thing can be pretty wild.
Exactly. They were very upfront about the regulatory uncertainties that still surround Bitcoin, the fact that it's still a relatively new asset compared to something like, good old-fashioned gold, and that its future is still, well, uncertain to say the least. Think of it like this. They shined this massive spotlight on Bitcoin, but also made sure to, put up some guardrails around it.
Which kind of brings us back to the heart of what we're diving into today. If we really want to wrap our heads around where Bitcoin might fit into the grand scheme of things, we got to be willing to, like, look beyond those traditional market signals.
And that is a really critical takeaway for anyone who's even remotely curious about Bitcoin, honestly. Don't get like swept up in all the hype cycles or try to force it into those neat little investment boxes that we're all used to. Bitcoin operates on a whole different wavelength, driven by forces that are, frankly, reshaping the global financial system as we know it.
It's like Bitcoin has this heartbeat of its own, and it's synchronized to those global anxieties and uncertainties that we were talking about before, and that, in turn, seems to be what's influencing its price movements.
Absolutely. And what's so remarkable is that BlackRock's analysis, it connects all of this back to something so fundamental, trust, or maybe more specifically, the erosion of trust in those traditional systems we've all come to rely on.
Now, that is a thought-provoking idea. What exactly do you mean by that?
Yeah.
It's almost like, the financial ground is shifting under our feet, and everyone's just scrambling to find something solid to stand on.
Wow, that's a really powerful way to put it. And, you're right. BlackRock's analysis, what it seems to be suggesting is that Bitcoin's rise, it might actually be a symptom of this, like this underlying decline in trust in those traditional pillars of finance that we've all relied on for so long. And that includes, yeah, even the US dollar as the global reserve currency. Think about it. When people start getting really worried about things like inflation, out of control government spending, just the stability of the whole system in general, they naturally start looking around for alternatives.
And Bitcoin, with its whole, like, fixed supply, that whole decentralized thing, it starts to look a little bit like a life raft in the middle of a storm.
Exactly. It represents this potential escape route from all the perceived shortcomings of that traditional financial system. It's like offering up this, decentralized digital alternative in a world that's, well, increasingly grappling with the downsides of centralized control.
So what you're saying is Bitcoin's future, in a way, it's like totally intertwined with the fate of the US dollar. Like, if one weakens, the other one's just going to keep getting stronger.
It's definitely a possibility, yeah. If the dollar were to, seriously falter, maybe lose its reserve status, experience some kind of major crisis of confidence, it's not that crazy to imagine that Bitcoin could actually benefit from that. People might start flocking to it as this, more stable, more reliable store of value, almost like a digital gold rush or something.
Interesting. But earlier, you used the phrase potentially disruptive.
Yeah.
So does that mean you think Bitcoin could actually, rival, maybe even replace the dollar someday?
Well, now we're getting into, seriously speculative territory. While it's true that Bitcoin has gained some serious traction, it's still, let's be honest, a relatively young system. It's got its own set of hurdles to overcome, things like, regulatory uncertainty, challenges with scalability. Plus, widespread adoption is definitely not guaranteed at this point. Think of it kind of like a really powerful new engine. The potential is definitely there, but it still needs some refining and, of course, much wider acceptance before it's ready for prime time.
So not dethroning the dollar anytime soon, then.
Probably not. But here's the thing. It's forcing a really important conversation to happen. It's challenging all these long-held assumptions about money, about value, about, honestly, the entire global financial system as we know it. And that, even on its own, that's a pretty seismic shift.
It's like Bitcoin is holding up this mirror to the traditional financial world and making us see everything, the good, the bad, highlighting those strengths and weaknesses we might not otherwise notice.
Exactly. It's forcing us to ask those tough questions like, can a decentralized digital currency like Bitcoin actually coexist with or even challenge the existing order? And those are questions with some really complex answers, but they're questions that everyone from BlackRock to, well, increasingly the rest of the world are having to grapple with.
And that brings us back to you, our listener. We've covered a ton of ground today, from BlackRock's, let's be honest, pretty eye-opening perspective on Bitcoin to its potential role in what is clearly a rapidly changing financial landscape.
We've seen how it just completely defies those traditional investment categories and how its future may very well be, deeply intertwined with the very systems that it seems to be trying to, well, disrupt. It's been a fascinating deep dive, to say the least.
So as we start to wrap things up here, what are some key takeaways that you think our listeners should keep in mind, especially as they're trying to, navigate this increasingly complex, ever-evolving world of finance?
I think the biggest one has got to be this. BlackRock's analysis really drives home the point that if you really want to understand Bitcoin, you got to be willing to look at it from a completely new perspective. Forget about those old traditional market signals. Instead, start thinking about global trends, trust, how technology and finance, even geopolitics are all starting to intertwine and influence each other in ways we never really considered before.
Yeah, it's about understanding the bigger picture, the interconnectedness of it all.
Absolutely. And honestly, even if you never end up buying a single Satoshi, just taking the time to understand Bitcoin and what it represents, it can give you some really valuable insights into the future of finance. It's like getting a glimpse into this whole movement towards decentralization, seeing the growing influence of technology on pretty much every aspect of our lives.
It's like we're peeking behind the curtain of traditional finance and getting a sneak preview of what might be coming next.
Precisely. And finally, and this is key, BlackRock's report, even with, its understandably cautious tone, it really underscores one crucial fact. Bitcoin is no longer some fringe phenomenon. The fact that the world's largest asset manager is paying attention, institutions are starting to take notice, that means this is something that deserves serious consideration in any discussion about the future of finance.
It's a conversation that's full of potential risks and rewards. There are definitely a lot of uncertainties, but also some incredible possibilities. It's a future that's still being written, and Bitcoin might just be holding one of the pens.
And that, my friend, is what makes this such an exciting time to be following the evolution of finance.
Couldn't agree more. So, to our listener, we leave you with this. Keep exploring, keep asking those tough questions, and most importantly, keep an open mind. The future of finance, much like Bitcoin itself, is full of surprises.